What NFC North difference maker is back on the radar for week number 9? Plus, how do you handle Puka Nakua's knee injury for this coming weekend? And what do you do with the biggest problem facing you in that Packers-Lions tilt this weekend? Plus, the 14th place team owner in the FFPC main event coming up for week 9. Brian Covert joins us for a long discussion on everything facing you trying to win the $1 million grand prize in the FFPC main event and the FantasyPros Championship. We've got a great show for you. I'm Eric Balkman. Brian Covert is here. Stick around. We've got a great show for you. Your high-stakes fantasy football hour officially starts now.
Can't stand the pressure. I've seen greater men than need a lesson.
Broadcast live and heard around the world, you are now watching the most entertaining hour of radio on the planet. Welcome to the High Stakes Fantasy Football Hour presented by myffpc.com with your hosts Eric Balkman and Ferrell Elliott. The High Stakes Fantasy Football Hour is your home for analysis from the best players in the world. And now, because no one else was available, here are Eric Balkman and Ferrell Elliott.
Solace in the scripture. Are we not all our father's sons? I became a man. Nobody ever told me what a man was.
To the Fantasy Football Players Championship High Stakes Fantasy Football Hour for Week 9, November 1st, Friday, 2024. I am your host, Eric Balkman. You know me from the RotoViz High Stakes Lowdown, of course, the Better Sports Network's High Stakes Fantasy Football Show, and the Fantasy Football Players Championship. You can connect with me on the X at Eric Balkman. Wow, what a show we have for you as we are coming up on crunch time, ladies and gentlemen, of the 2024 season, as we're looking forward to awarding not one, but $2 million grand prizes. I want to thank Rob and greetings and salutations to all of you Balkaholics watching tonight. It is the latest episode of the HSFF Hour. No Ferrell Elliott tonight. He is under the weather, but we look forward to having him back next week. But I will introduce my co-host here shortly. If you want to connect with us on the X, do so at HSFF Hour. And, of course, at Eric Balkman. If you want to learn more about Ferrell's Kentucky Fantasy Football State Championship, check it out at KFFSC.com, Facebook.com/HSFF Hour is where to connect with us. You can also email the show at highstakesfantasyfootball@gmail.com. If you have any questions, now is the time to send them in. highstakesfantasyfootball@gmail.com. We'll try to get to all the questions in the fantasy feedback segment later on in the show, along with your X posts as well as your Facebook posts too. I want to thank our audio engineer, my best friend Bryce, as well as our producer and mutual friend Rob for getting this show off and running tonight. If you are looking for some action in the Fantasy Football Players Championship, look no further than myffpc.com. We have the weekly challenge available for you now. You can play with kickers and defenses, without kickers and defenses. 10 player lineups or 12 player lineups with a $35 or a $200 entry fee, and you can win up to $2,500. myffpc.com. There is no draft. There is no salary cap. All you have to do is put together your best lineup going forward. The only stipulation, you can't double up. So if you want Jalen Hurts, you can't have Saquon Barkley. If you want Patrick Mahomes, you can't have Travis Kelce. If you want Kirk Cousins, you cannot have Drake London. There is no stacking. There's no doubling up. One player per team. It is the same format as the world-famous FFPC Playoff Challenge, which will be coming up. We'll introduce that in, I want to say, roughly a month and a half or so. And give you all the details on that right here on the show. But myffpc.com is where to sign up for the weekly challenge right now, myffpc.com, if you are looking for action in the Fantasy Football Players Championship. Just because we are off and running halfway through the season doesn't mean you can't stop formulating FFPC teams. Remember to like this video, subscribe to the channel, comment on the video, share it with your friends, share it with your enemies, and get notified each and every time we go live, which will be Tuesday. Will be the next time we go live. I'll give you more updates on that as we hit up the latter part of the show tonight and tell you everything that's going on. Ferrell Elliott, like I said, will be back next week, and we will talk with him then. He is under the weather. Get well soon, Ferrell Elliott, and we hope to speak with him on November 8th. The next time this show will go live. But Rest assured, I have a great co-host for you tonight. He is 14th overall in the FFPC Main Event heading into Week 9. A guy that has multiple Fantasy Pros and FFPC Main Event league titles to his name. You follow him on the X at Brian Covert 7. Please welcome onto the program, Mr. Brian Covert. Brian, welcome in, man. Tonight, thank you so much for hanging out with me tonight.
How you doing? Good to be here.
Doing excellent. Now, refresh my memory, because I know we planned on it, but I don't know if it happened or not. Did you appear on an FFPC Pros versus Joes broadcast earlier this summer?
Last year, yes. Yep.
Last year. Okay, I thought so. And that was the case. And now you are crushing it this year in the FFPC Main Event. I always bring this up, whether it's September, October, November, December, it is always cool to see your team hover at the top of the leaderboard. Heading into Week 9, you were in 14th place overall. What's it like seeing your name up there above thousands of other teams in your pursuit for this $1 million grand prize?
Oh, it's great. Last week I was number 4 and I dropped to 14. So I was just like, I had one bad week. So it's amazing how you can go from here to there in 1 week just because of some players.
Yeah, well, and that's what happens. And I looked at the Killer Clowns team too. You have a good situation in the fact that I wouldn't say good situation, but you have an interesting situation where I've seen a lot of teams win the $1 million grand prize where your lineup kind of sets itself, right? Based on bye weeks, based on injuries or whatever. You have a really, really good lineup and you don't have to make these tough decisions because your lineup is kind of dictating who you start each and every week. That kind of makes it easier for you. I know it makes it a little bit dicey because if one injury or one bye week happens, you're like, oh my God, what do I do? But that hasn't been the case for you so far this year.
Yeah, I've been lucky so far. I have a couple injuries that have come up that kind of killed me last week. So Mike Evans going down, and then I had to throw in Tyler Lockett.
Right.
And he did nothing. And then the Titans and the Detroit just killed the Titans. And Amon-Ra St. Brown didn't do anything. Got a touchdown, 1 catch, and 7 yards. So the games dictated themselves. So
I here's what I want to do tonight. I want to get into the fantasy flash. I want to get into the emails that everybody has presented for us. But I think without further ado, because the YouTube is lighting up right now, let's go into the YouTube chat. Once again, Tom Smith, our good buddy in the KFFSC and the FFPC, pops aboard to say, did you guys notice that for Halloween last night in that Thursday night football game, CJ Stroud dressed up as Anthony Richardson? Wow. Totally accurate. And I don't know what happened last night. Was it a case of the Jets defense? Was it a case of him missing Nico Collins and Stephon Diggs? But Stroud was not great last night.
Oh,
Brian,
no.
as we look,
you're breaking up.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Okay.
Yeah.
So let me just ask you this, Brian. CJ Stroud last night, your concerns on this guy going forward after his performance against the Jets?
I think he needs his players back because he did not look good last night at all.
And the thing with
did you hear that? You're frozen again.
Oh, sorry. I was
just saying CJ Stroud didn't look good last night at all. And I think it's a lack of weapons. All he has is 2 players to throw to or to use.
If you have Stroud going forward in your FFPC league, do you have to give it pause? Do you have to think twice before you start him in your lineup, Brian? Because last night was indicative of him having Tank Dell and like Dalton Schultz, and that was it. Like we looked at last year with CJ Stroud was the wunderkind, right? This was the guy that everybody wanted to have on their team. Everybody wanted to have in their lineup. This year, it's been a different story. What was he last night? Like 11 of 30? It was bad. And now I think if you have Stroud, you have to look elsewhere going forward until he gets Nico Collins back because we know he's not getting Diggs back.
I wouldn't start him until his players come back. I would look somewhere else. If you don't have anybody else to play, then you got to start him anyway. But pending the matchup, I would find another option personally.
Yeah,
Bo Nix is out there for the most part. He might be a better option.
And that's the thing. It's like you have to look at what's available in your league. You have to look at the other options at this point, because we are coming up on the end of the regular season in both the Fantasy Pros Championship and the FFPC Main Event. And if you don't have somebody opposite, or if you don't have another option besides CJ Stroud, you might be left out in the cold. And that's why it's important to have this. It's important to roster a secondary quarterback, even if you invested a top 5. I don't want to say top 5 or top 6 pick, but if you invested a top pick in one of the top 6 quarterbacks in the FFPC Main Event, you have to figure out something else at this point if you have CJ Stroud, because it's not looking great for him. I'll tell you another thing that is not looking great for FFPC players right now: the Tennessee Titans running back situation. Let's talk about this. We found out a few hours ago, Brian, that Tyjae Spears is not playing in Week 9 against the Patriots. We also found out that Tony Pollard did not practice at all this week either. And he is questionable against New England. To have a running back not practice all week and expect him to go this weekend against New England, that is a tall task. And as Permar99 points out, it is Julius D's chestnut season right now for the Titans. This is a guy that you could still get because the FFPC has that waiver wire run on Sunday morning. But I really question anybody who is counting on either Pollard or Spears this week. We know Spears is not playing, and it's not looking great for Pollard right now. Your thoughts on Julius Chestnut as a Week 9 flex against New England in the FFPC?
I was actually looking into that because in the Scott Fish Bowl, I do have Tony Pollard, and I have a replacement for him if he can't go, but I didn't put in a waiver for Chestnut yet in the FFPC because I'm not sure. My lineup's pretty good. So I think they're just so bad. I'm a Titans fan. I'm just telling you the truth. They're just horrible. So he might be a sleeper this week though. If you can pick him up, stash him, and then if Pollard doesn't go, throw him in there. If you're desperate, maybe he gets you a touchdown and 50 yards and a couple catches.
Brian, I'm with you too. I think that this is a player that should not be on waiver wires in the FFPC Main Event or the Fantasy Pros Championship. You have to find a way to get him on your roster, and maybe it works out on Sunday where you can deploy this guy against New England. And low expectations, but he could churn out 60, 70 total yards, maybe a touchdown or two. As long as you're a Titans fan, let me ask you this. Calvin Ridley, this is an interesting practice week for him. Number one, he crushed it in Week 8. 10 catches for 100 some yards in basically the first quarter. He had a huge game last week. He did not practice on Wednesday with a shoulder injury. Full participant on Thursday, and then a rest day today, which is kind of weird. But whatever. Ridley has among the highest target share projections in the league going into Week 9. And certainly the quarterback situation isn't great. How do you feel about deploying Calvin Ridley as a top 25 receiver in the FFPC this week? Feel not great about it, okay about it, or really good about it?
As long as he's starting, I would deploy him, and I feel pretty good about it. As long as Mason Rudolph is the quarterback. I can't trust Will Levis if he hasn't shown anything to me. So if Mason Rudolph is the starter this week, then I would deploy Calvin Ridley. I don't think I would if Will Levis is the quarterback.
So Rudolph is actually the better option for Ridley over Levis this week in your
I think so, yes.
Okay. And that's fair, and I totally get it.
I mean, he was one of the top wide quarterbacks in fantasy last week. Yeah. He was just throwing it all over the place.
I think that when you look at Ridley, it's a nuanced situation, right? Because of how bad the team has been, how bad the running game could be. I don't want to say how bad it is, but then the fact that you don't have DeAndre Hopkins on this team anymore, and Calvin Ridley is the guy on this squad. So I think that you break ties in favor of Ridley. You break ties in favor of the number one option, receiving option in this offense, which is Ridley in week 9. So I'm with you for sure on this. And it's interesting you say this, but again, I'm thinking in my head right now, I think you're right. I think Mason Rudolph is actually the better option than Will Levis. If you are rooting for a quarterback, if you have Ridley, you should be rooting for Mason Rudolph to start this game, which I think he will going forward. I want to ask you this, Michael Kunzel, right now in the YouTube chat, when we were talking about Julius Chestnut being a pickup on Sunday morning, how much fab would you spend on him right now? What's it going to take, in your estimation, Brian, to get Chestnut on your team on Sunday morning?
It really just depends on how desperate you are. I mean, I wouldn't probably go more than 20% of my budget on him, if that's the case. I mean, it really just depends on your desperation. If you really need a running back that bad, if you don't have anybody else to fill in for Tony Pollard or Tajay Spears, I would go 20% at the max.
Yeah, I'm kind of with you on that because, I know we're coming up on the end of the regular season in the FFPC, and you certainly don't want to overspend at this point, but overspending wouldn't be the worst idea in the world, given that we're Sunday will be November 3rd. This is not September 3rd anymore. We are 2 months into the season, and it wouldn't be the worst idea in the world I'll give you a perfect example. In the KFFSC, and apologies that Ferrell Elliott isn't on tonight, but the commissioner of the KFFSC, the league where I play my most leagues in right now, I have one team that's in contention. I only have one quarterback on that team, Brian, and it's Brock Purdy. He's not playing this week because he's on bye. I had to overspend on Jameis Winston. I got him, but I had to overspend on him to make sure I got a decent quarterback this week. Similar to what you're saying about Julius Chestnut, if you do need a running back, you probably need to overspend on him. It may only be a 1 week thing. And if it's only a 1 week thing, that week could get you a win, or it could get you a lot of points this week, which could be the difference in you making the playoffs and not making the playoffs, similar to what I'm looking at with Jameis Winston in the KFFSC. So you have to know your team, you have to know your league, and you have to know the situation you're in. It could be worthwhile to spend 20% of your blind bidding budget. It could be not worthwhile to spend, 20% or more than 20% on that looking forward as well. A couple more questions in the YouTube chat right now. I'll go to Tom Smith. Eric, you being a longtime cheesehead, do you think Jordan Love plays on Sunday? Now, Ian Rappaport reported a couple of hours ago, Brian, that it appears Jordan Love is tracking to play in I don't want to say a must win for the Packers against the Lions, but if they do lose this game against Detroit at Lambeau Field on Sunday, that means they are 0-2 in the division, in one of the best divisions in pro football. And both of those games will be at home because they lost to the Vikings at Lambeau Field a few weeks back. Rappaport, quote, said, barring falling down the stairs or something horrible tomorrow, Love expects to play on Sunday. I don't know if I have this on the rundown, but I'll bring it up right now. Oh, I do have it on the rundown. He practiced today. Your thoughts, Brian, not only on Jordan Love and deploying him as a starting quarterback in fantasy this week, but your thoughts on deploying Jaden Reed, Romeo Doubs, Tucker Kraft, all these Packers pass catchers, knowing that Jordan Love is hobbled and knowing that there is a very real possibility he doesn't make it all the way through this game against Detroit on Sunday. How are you handling your Green Bay Packers in week 9, my friend?
If Jordan Love is starting, I'm going to play him because they're not going to put him out there if they know they have a bye coming up, if he's not 100% healthy. If not, they're just going to hold him out and put in, forgot his name, former Titan, Malik Willis.
Malik Willis, yes.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't start anybody if Malik Willis is playing because he runs the ball and doesn't really throw the ball. But if Jordan Love goes, you definitely got to start Jalen Reed because he's a slot. Mm-hmm. And who are they playing again? The Charger? No,
the Packers got the Lions at 4:25 on Sunday afternoon.
The slot is very vulnerable for the Lions. Like their corners, the slot corner is not that good. So you want to start Jalen Reed. Most definitely out of all of them, if you have them, that's what I would do. But if Jordan Love's not going, if you have Jalen Reed, you got to start your Green Bay Packers anyway. But caution it.
Yeah, I am with you. And here's my thought, regardless of if a hobbled Love or Willis plays, right? So regardless of the quarterback situation, I'm playing Reed. I'm with you. I think you got to start him no matter who the quarterback in Green Bay is. Romeo Doubs, I think if Love is the starter and Love is going to play, I would break ties in favor of Romeo Doubs. I would put him out there. After that, I'm benching Wicks. I'm benching Christian Watson and Tucker Kraft. Depending upon your tight end situation, I could see a case for benching him, but Malik Willis still utilizes him. So I would break ties, again, regardless of who the quarterback is in Green Bay, I would break ties in favor of Tucker Kraft. I'd rather have him starting than being benched this week. Again, this is regardless of if it's Love or Willis. The total in that game, I have to look it up. I think it's like 50. There's going to be a lot of points in that game. To your point, Brian, Willis will look at his first read. He'll maybe look at his second read, but then he's off and running, right? Mm-hmm. He does not look at his third and fourth read like Jordan Love does. And that's the thing that we have to be concerned about. We will get into and by the way, keep the questions coming on the YouTube chat. We appreciate it. We will get into the Fantasy Flash. Brian, I want to get into your interview here before we're already 23 minutes into the show. Time is slipping away. I want to get into this. Before we talk fantasy football more with you, tell us what you're doing for a living when you're not hovering up at the top of the leaderboard of the FFPC Main Event.
I brew beer.
Shut up. Do you really?
Yeah.
You are a home brewer. That's fantastic.
I'm a home brewer. Killer Clowns Brewing Company. That's what I call it. I got my own label and everything. So
that is fantastic. So what are you brewing? IPAs, stouts, porters, sours, everything, or do you center on one stout?
I just brewed a sour. I like IPAs. I tried to do, I think the last IPA I did was a habanero pineapple. So.
Oh my God, this is fantastic.
Yeah.
I am a massive craft brew fan. So to hear this is awesome. How long have you been doing this?
Probably 7 years, 8 years.
7 years, 7 or 8 years. What is your favorite style of beer to brew? What's your expertise in? Is it IPAs?
IPAs, yes.
There's a lot you can do with that, right? Depending upon how many hops you want to load into it, the different types of hops you want to load into it. Jim Cole, my current and ex and kind of current partner in the KFFSC, brews his own beer in the Oregon Territory, in the North Woods of the country, in the Pacific Northwest. So his head is exploding right now listening to this. But IPAs are fantastic because of all the different things you can do for it. We've got to hook up sometime in real life. I got to try some of the Killer Clowns beer.
Well, I was thinking once I win the million, I'll open up a brewery and I'll fly you out.
I would love this. I would
fly you out for the opening.
Fantastic. Yeah, Rubio right now in the YouTube chat. A fellow Hayes bro in the on the hsffhour. Michael Kenzel says he is a stout lover. And we're coming up on stout season as well. Listen, we could talk craft brew for the duration of the show. I want to bring the conversation back to fantasy football here before I get overwhelmed and start talking about IPAs and hazy IPAs, West Coast IPAs, whatever. Zach Moss is out. We found out that he is not playing this week against the Raiders on Sunday. Chase Brown before this was a player that most people were trying to get in their lineups in the FFPC as a flex player at a minimum. Now that we know Moss is not playing, Brian, is Chase Brown just simply a must play given how the Bengals offense has been coming on and given how Chase Brown has been coming on? Your thoughts on Brown, not only in week 9, but going forward as well?
Yeah, I was high on him in the beginning. I didn't get a chance to draft him. I do have Zach Moss in the FFPC. And I just found that out today, actually, that he was out. So he was one of my contingency plans if one of my guys didn't go. But I think Chase Brown, was high on my board in the beginning of the draft. So I think he's good because he catches the ball, he runs the ball, and he scores touchdowns. So he's going to be a focal point of that offense.
I totally agree on that. And I think, much as we're saying, you break ties against Dontavian Wicks, you break ties against Christian Watson, you are breaking ties in favor of Chase Brown this week. This guy has been a godsend. I think about whenever I'm in a fantasy football season, Brian, I don't know about you, but I'm constantly thinking about where this guy is going to go in next year's draft, right? And Chase Brown is a guy that is going to go much, much higher in 2025 drafts than he went in 2024. And this is the time of year that you exploit that. You exploit having Chase Brown on your team as a flex or as a second running back, because I do think he's a top 20 play this week, given not only his role in the rushing game, but how Joe Burrow has been utilizing him in the pass game as well. I love Chase Brown this week going forward. This is a good thing that Zach Moss is out this week, and the sky's the limit for Chase Brown.
Not really. I needed Zach Moss in there.
Well, I have. It's not like I don't have Zach Moss anywhere. Like it would have been nice to deploy him. We have two teams on bye this week in the 49ers and Steelers. So I have no Jalen Warren. I have no Najee Harris. I have no George Pickens this week. I have no Deebo Samuel. No Brandon Ayuk the rest of the season. Nor George Kittle. Yeah. No Christian McCaffrey. No Jordan Mason. So it would have been nice to have Zach Moss at my disposal. So I get it. But for my Chase Brown squads, I'm okay with it. I'm okay with it for week 9. Derek Carr is expected to make his return for the New Orleans Saints this week. And what better time to come back than when your team is playing against the Carolina Panthers? This is a great opportunity. This is a great matchup. However, it is his first week back. There are people who had Russell Wilson that they were deploying in Superflex leagues. There were people like me that were deploying Brock Purdy as their number one quarterback. They don't have that capability this week to play either of those guys. How much can FFPC players trust Derek Carr? Granted, in his first week back, but in a really, really good matchup against arguably the worst team in the league in the Carolina Panthers, Brian.
I mean, he went off last time he played him. I think it was week 1 or week 2. So I would start him. If he's going to play, he's going to play. He's been out long enough. He's got all the weapons. It actually helps Olave. It helps Kamara. It helps. I mean, they lost for Shaheed, so that doesn't help. I don't really know who the second wide receiver is, but Kamara, I mean, it helps me out because I have Kamara. So I'm glad. Yeah, he's back. I would start him. I would play him. He's not. These people aren't going to play if they're hurt. If they're not 100%, the coaches aren't going to put him in there. They're gonna not tell you everything. They're not going to tell the reporters everything. That's really what's going on with them. So if he has an oblique injury and he's been out for that long, and they want to start him this week, they're going to start him because they don't have anything else. Those quarterbacks are horrible. They are bad.
Permar 99 letting us know Kamara is the second wide receiver in that offense. I was looking at our lads right now trying to figure out who the number 2 receiver is with Rashid Shaheed on the shelf. You have Bub Means, who's dealing with an injury, Cedric Wilson, Mason Tipton, and then you have Alvin Kamara, who probably is looking at 5 catches, 6 catches, maybe 7 or more catches this week as well.
I need him to do that.
And he might very normally I say, well, you shouldn't be counting on that kind of thing. But I think this week you can count on it for sure. The Panthers and the Saints met in New Orleans week 1. The Panthers losing that game to New Orleans 47-10. Yep. Chris Olave, no problem this week. He is not in concussion protocol. He's going to be a full go. I'm with you. I think you can trust Derek Carr for sure in Superflex leagues, and I think he's an interesting play going forward in start 1 quarterback leagues as well. Let's go with a question from Michael Kunzel right now, a running back question. And I think this is interesting too. I don't think I have it on the rundown for the Giants. No, I do not. He is facing Devin Singletary or Roshan Johnson as his second running back this week. And this is probably a case of having Najee Harris or having Jordan Mason and having to start one of these guys as your second running back. So as we look at it right now, we know that Tyrone Tracy cleared concussion protocol. He is expected to go on Sunday on a short week, which I was kind of planning on Tyrone Tracy not playing this week at all because it was a short week and he was in the protocol. But we're seeing this more and more that these guys are clearing concussion protocol even in a short week, heading in, where they're not missing a game at all. Singletary at home against the Washington Commanders. And then you have Roshan Johnson this week, who is playing the Arizona Cardinals in the desert, right? If you were facing that decision, who would you deploy here, knowing that both of these guys are probably going to be the second running back off the bench, or the first running back off the bench for both these teams this week?
Well, like you said, I just threw Tyrone Tracy in my lineup. I had Singletary in there, but I threw Tyrone Tracy in there because I found out he was actually cleared concussion protocol. But I would probably still go with Singletary or Roschon. Roschon's just touchdown dependent at this point with DeAndre Swift, the way he's playing. I don't think Roschon has done much at all. I haven't really followed him, but I know Singletary has the upside. If you're just looking for like hopefully to get a goal line touchdown and like hopefully 10 points, I would start Roschon. But Tyrone Tracy he's past concussion protocol, but he still has that point to where they might not put him in the whole time. They're going to rotate him and Singletary. Swift and Roschon don't really rotate much. Swift seems to just be in there the whole time.
Yeah, I mean, he will get the occasional inside the 5 carry. But you're right. I mean, like for me, I think that Singletary and Tracy are in much more of a timeshare than what's going on in Chicago right now with Swift and Johnson for sure. The other thing that Michael Kenzel brings up, this is a quarterback question. Are we trusting Bo Nix over Kyler Murray this week? Bo Nix is on the road against the Ravens. Kyler Murray at home against the Bears. Listen, I'm a huge fan of what Nix has done so far, but I also understand the talent level that he has been facing on defenses. Kyler Murray, with all apologies to Bo Nix, represents more of an upside because of what he can do with his legs. I am not trusting Nix over Murray this week. I would rather play Murray. And Brian, it sounds like you agree. Murray over Nix.
Totally. Yep.
The next thing I want to bring up, let's do Kyle Pitts. Let's talk about Kyle Pitts. It's an FFPC show. We have to talk about tight ends here. Has he turned a corner for you in your opinion here, Brian? When we look at what Kyle Pitts has been able to do over the last several weeks, he had 4 for 91 and 2 touchdowns this past week on National Tight Ends Day. Thank you, George Kittle. The week before that, 7 for 65. The week before that, 3 for 70. The week before that, 7 catches for 88 yards. Now, he's only been in the end zone 3 times this season. But if we look at the last 4 weeks, this dude has hit a minimum of 65 receiving yards. He gets the Dallas Cowboys this week in a potential shootout. I don't know what your philosophy has been on Kyle Pitts since he's come into the league, but he's been a very polarizing guy. But over the last month, he's looked very, very good, Brian.
Yes, I actually have him in pros versus the FantasyPros Championship League, and he's doing very well for me. But even when he was a rookie, when I was in Vegas, when he came out as a rookie a couple years ago, I drafted him. I've been high on him ever since he's come out, and I get him when I can. Because I know eventually he's just going to break out. He just needed a quarterback. And he finally got one.
So for you, going forward, you feel very comfortable starting him, and even heading into 2025 drafts, if Cousins is still there, you still feel very comfortable about this guy, right?
Oh, yes, of course. Yeah. Mm-hmm. I don't think we've seen his full potential yet. He's just starting. He's just coming out now. It's been a couple of years. He's finally got a good quarterback under center that can actually deliver the ball to him. And they actually have a good play caller finally instead of Arthur Smith. So, I would put him. I would draft him as early as I can get him.
We are talking with the CEO of the Killer Clowns franchise in the FFPC, 14th place in the main event heading into week 9. His name is Brian Covert, and we have to talk about the Cleveland Browns offense because Deshaun Watson is now out for the year. Jameis Winston, we saw what he was able to do in week 8, which has been great for the Browns offense. But I think the biggest thing, and especially with the waiver wire that ran on Wednesday night for the FFPC, there is a trio of interesting receivers here. And I don't want to say it's led by anybody because I don't know who the Browns receiver is to own. Is it Cedric Tillman? Is it Elijah Moore? Is it Jerry Jeudy? They get the Chargers this week, and not a great matchup, but Winston is going to pump the ball down the field. Your thoughts on which Cleveland receiver is not only the guy you want to own going forward, but the guy that you want to start in week 9 against Los Angeles between Tillman, Moore, and Jeudy, Brian?
I think Cedric Tillman had the one game. You just can't follow that trend that he's going to do that every week, and Winston's going to throw the ball that week. So I would go more reliable. I'd probably go Elijah Moore. I think he's going to catch him and Jerry Jeudy. I would go those two over Tillman. Tillman's a hit or miss in my view.
I think that.
That.
Go ahead.
I just think Jeudy and Elijah Moore are going to get more targets. He's good for the long shot, the long ball. You might get lucky with the 77-yard bomb touchdown, but if you want consistency, like 7 catches, 60 yards, and possible a touchdown to get more points, I would go with Elijah Moore or Jerry Jeudy. Instead of getting 1 catch, 77 yards, and a touchdown, you might get a lot of points, but that might not happen.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
So, I want consistency.
Consistency is huge, especially when you're talking about, your first or second flex in the FFPC. How do you handle that, Brian? Are you looking for like a higher floor, or are you looking for a high ceiling? Knowing that you're going up against thousands of other teams, right? But also knowing that this isn't the championship round. You're still trying to win your league to try to get there. How do you handle what you're looking at? Do you want a high floor or a high ceiling at this point in the season?
I'm actually going for the floor. I just want consistency. I don't need, I know what Kamara is going to do. I know what Henry's going to do. I know what Jackson's going to do. So I'm just looking for like Amon-Ra. He might not score a touchdown, but he might get me 10 catches and 106 yards, get me 20 points just in that alone. So I'm looking more than that than just the go-getter. And I think that's what I did it this year in the draft. After, I think this is my 7th year, I finally came up with a strategy that I never really deployed, and it's actually worked. So I was like, all right, cool. It finally worked.
Can you talk a little bit about that draft strategy as opposed to like what you did in your first half dozen years in the FFPC main event, Brian, to what you're doing this year? How did you change it up that has gotten you into the top 15 in the main event heading into week 9?
I used to go running back heavy. Running back, and then wide receiver, quarterback, tight end. And this year I had a strategy to where if McCaffrey, Bijan, or Paul weren't there, I'm glad I didn't even have a chance to get McCaffrey. It was Jefferson or Amon-Ra. I chose Amon-Ra. Came back, and all year I wanted Henry and Lamar Jackson. They were trying to get him in every league, and Henry was there, so I grabbed him. Then got lucky enough to come back and get Kamara. So I tried to start my lineups to where I was getting 2 quarterbacks, 2 running backs, a wide receiver, or 2 quarterbacks, 2 wide receivers, a quarter, and I want 2 running backs, 2 wide receivers, a quarterback, and a tight end in my first 6 picks. That way I have my starting lineup already set. This year I kind of deviated and ended up getting Dallas Goedert in round 7. But Aaron Jones was available, so I took the best player available rather than going for a tight end. And then Goddard was doing me good, and now he's hurt. So that's my weakness, is I'm fighting for tight ends. I just picked up Gesicki.
Yeah, and T. Higgins is out this week again. So Gesicki is looking very good. There was, I would say like 3 weeks ago or so, there was this Eric All uprising where everybody said, oh, All's taking over. All's the guy that you want for tight end in Cincinnati. And now we're seeing like, not so fast, my friend, as Lee Corso would say, that it's still Gesicki. He had the big week last week, and he could have another big week this week. I also think it's interesting, too, and you kind of touched on this. Lamar Jackson, Derrick Henry, you have both of them in Baltimore, and it's paid off. Like, a lot of people will not go after an elite quarterback and an elite running back on the same team early. You did this year, and it's been paying off for the Ravens because that offense has been fantastic. That's another thing, too, that we should understand. Like, just because these 2 players are in the same backfield doesn't mean you should not invest heavy draft capital in them, because it's been paying off for you, my friend.
Yeah, I mean, once you knew they got Derrick Henry, that would open up for Lamar Jackson, because they have to account for the run, because he's technically the best running back in the NFL right now. So. And Lamar Jackson can also run, so you're getting points there. So that was my strategy on that, figuring they have to account for, RPOs and whatnot with Derrick Henry. So,
It's been a handful. It's been a handful to handle both Henry and Jackson for opposing defenses, and it's been paying off for you in spades. So congratulations on those 2 picks there. Let's talk about Denver. I know we touched on Bo Nix here briefly, going up against said Ravens this week in Baltimore. But if you look at what Courtland Sutton has been able to do, so he had 8 for 100 this past week. The week before, he did not get any targets even against the Saints. The week before that, 53 yards, 32 yards, 60, 68, 26, 38. So he's been involved in the Broncos offense, 2 touchdowns on the season. Can you talk a little bit about what you see for the Broncos offense going forward, specifically with Bo Nix and Courtland Sutton, knowing they have to go on the road to Baltimore this week, then they have to go to Arrowhead next week, then they get the Falcons, the Raiders, the Browns, things kind of soften up, then they get the Colts. They're at the Chargers, which isn't a great matchup, and then the Bengals to wrap up the fantasy season. How real are Bo Nix, Courtland Sutton, and the rest of the Broncos offense for you?
I think they're in contention. Their record speaks for itself. I think they're 5-3, and Baltimore is vulnerable to the pass. So I have Courtland Sutton in some leagues, and I'm starting him. So I think they'll be good going forward. And there's really no one else there. So Courtland Sutton's the number 1, and he's proven that he's capable of putting up good numbers. So I think they're going to be good going forward. I don't know if they'll hit a wall and not make the playoffs, but at this point, Bo Nix is a rookie that was overlooked in the draft. I think he's better than Caleb Williams at this point.
You know, it's interesting you bring that up, because if you look at both Jaden Daniels and Bo Nix, to a certain extent, they have outperformed what we thought we were going to get out of them. Caleb Williams, I don't think we can say he has been outperforming what we expected. He's been okay. He's hit or miss, but I think, you know, the other thing that's holding him back is that offensive line in Chicago. It's not where the Bears wanted it to be at, and it's not where we as fantasy owners wanted it to be at for Caleb Williams going forward. But yeah, Nix has caught me by surprise. We had a situation. My son, who's 11 years old, Brian, played fantasy football against his buddies for the first time this year.
At 11?
At 11, yes. And it's his flag football team. It's all these guys. They all got a team in the league. And we've had Jaden Daniels at quarterback in this league all season. And then, as you know, we didn't know what was going to happen with him last week. And we ran it all the way up to game. It was the late window, right? 4:05, 4:25 last week. I picked up Bo Nix early last week. And my son was saying, look, we got to play Daniels. We got to play Daniels. We got to play Daniels. And I said, I still like Nix against the Panthers. And even with that Jaden Daniels Hail Mary at the end, Nix was still the right quarterback to start. But that said, it was against a lesser opponent. It was against the Carolina Panthers. And now they go to the Ravens this week. I think we have to consider that, to your point. Like, they're for real, but at the same time, we still got to consider the opponent. Not the Panthers this week. It's the Ravens on the road. I want to move on and talk about those Ravens here. I'll get back to it. Lamar Jackson practiced in full today.
Yes.
If you had exactly, you and me are of the same mind, because I have Lamar Jackson as my sole quarterback on several teams this year, and I did not want to have to try to drop somebody else and try to pick up a second quarterback this week. I feel good about playing Lamar Jackson this week. However, I want to ask you this: knowing that he is beat up, he's got the back injury, he's got the knee injury he's dealing with, does that give you pause? Especially with the trade that went down this week, too, with Deontay Johnson coming to Baltimore from Carolina. Does that give you pause on starting Johnson, on starting Flowers, on starting Andrews? Is Lamar Jackson playing this game, which he is going to do, at less than 100%, give you pause on starting some of these other Ravens pass catchers?
Not at all. He's playing. He's good enough. He's MVP 2 years in a row. He's fine. I would not bench anybody. Deontay Johnson, I wouldn't start him. I would probably wait to see how they're going to utilize him before I put him in my lineup. But Zay Flowers and Bateman and Andrews, and then you got Henry,
right,
and Justice Hill. So you need. I mean, yeah, I think even if he doesn't run as much because he doesn't want to take the shots, I think he's fine. Just I don't see any issue. I would not put a substitute in for him, because right now I have Carr on my bench just in case, because I knew Jackson was hurt. So I got Carr And I had Aaron Rodgers.
You had Aaron Rodgers. That's what I was going to bring up. You didn't start him last night knowing that you had the opportunity to start either Lamar Jackson or Derek Carr this week.
Yep. So I had Aaron. I'm like, I'm glad I didn't start him because Jackson will throw up 30 points. And then you'll be like, oh.
I think that's interesting to bring up because, like, I understand that he might not run as much this week, which is okay because that makes these other guys more startable. It makes me feel better about Flowers and Andrews and Derrick Henry, who could catch some dump offs. Normally, I don't like starting running backs on teams with talented quarterbacks that can run. And Lamar Jackson, maybe instead of running this week, dumps it off to Henry and maybe Justice Hill a little bit more. So yeah, I'm with you on this. This makes perfect sense. We know DK Metcalf is not playing this week. He has been ruled out already. So it is going to be the Tyler Lockett and Jackson Smith-Njigba show this week against the Rams in the late window. They are at home. Your thoughts on both Smith-Njigba and Lockett? How do you feel about starting these guys knowing that Metcalf is going to miss this game, Brian?
I would definitely start them both. I was actually, unfortunately, I have to start Lockett, and he killed me last week in the FFPC because Evans went down. So I was actually hoping Metcalf would play so he would draw coverage and then leave Lockett open because Geno Smith didn't look so good last week. But I would both of them are starts for sure this week. And Noah Fant's out now, so I don't know who he was ruled out too, and he was on my team too. So I was just like, good night. That's why I picked up Gesicki because I knew something was going on with my tight ends. I don't have any. I don't have one. So, but I would start them both definitely.
And the Fant injury is interesting when you couple it with the Metcalf injury because the total on that game is 48. The Seahawks, believe it or not, are a home dog in that game to the Rams. So it should be a good week for both Lockett and Smith-Njigba here.
We hope.
We hope indeed. I have both those guys I have Lockett probably in like 3 leagues, Smith-Njigba in like 4 or 5. So I plan on flexing them out for sure this week, and we'll see what happens in that Seahawks Rams game. That is going to be a fun one to watch in the late window on Sunday. We are fast running out of time, and there's so much more I want to get to. I want to ask you this right now. A sleeper that you think FFPC players, by and large, are not playing this week in week 9, that they're going to regret not playing. A guy that you're looking at flexing out in some leagues this week, Brian. And then a player that you think a lot of FFPC players are going to be starting, but it's actually going to be bad news for them because this guy is going to underwhelm. Both sides of the spectrum. I'll let you attack this question.
All right. Like we talked earlier, I think Elijah Moore is a sneaky pick, a sleeper this week. With the volume he'll probably get from Jameis Winston, I would go with that. And then as far as I think Kyren Williams everybody's gonna start him because he's so consistent with his touchdowns. I think he's gonna I don't think he's gonna perform like everybody thinks he is for some reason. I just think he's gonna have one of those bad weeks. These running backs they just can't keep going. So eventually they're gonna hit a wall, and I think he's gonna hit a wall this week because there's a lot of upsets in the NFL this year, so you never know what's going to happen. Like Baltimore lost to Cleveland last week. Who would have thought that was going to happen, right?
Right.
So Tillman catching touchdowns at the end of the game. So I think Elijah Moore is a sleeper, and I think Kyren Williams is going to disappoint some people.
Yeah, and it's weird because, like, with the Kyren Williams aspect, I don't happen to disagree with you on it. I could see him disappointing, but at the same time, it's difficult for me to say, hey, sit this guy. But
I wouldn't sit him, but
you got to lower expectations, right?
Yes,
that's what it is, and I'm with you on that for sure. So much more I want to get to here in the last 10 minutes of the show. I want to go to Minnesota this week. TJ Hawkinson has been removed from the injury report for the Vikings. He is going to play Sunday night against the Colts. This is the first time that he will be playing in an NFL game since he tore his ACL and MCL last season. Last year, he is averaging just over 6 catches and 64 yards per game. I do believe he was the tight end 1 in the FFPC before he got hurt last year. Now, what my concern is he is not heavily involved in the game plan. You have Justin Jefferson there. You have Jordan Addison posting on Instagram this week about something about freeing Jordan Addison or whatever it was. Basically, he's pulling a Romeo Dobbs, saying he wasn't getting the ball enough, and maybe the squeaky wheel gets the grease in that offense. My concern coming into the season for Hockenson was not necessarily the injury, Brian, because I knew he'd be coming back at some point. It was the quarterback play. I didn't know what kind of quarterback they were getting in Sam Darnold. And Sam Darnold's been very, very good this year, and definitely good enough to keep Jefferson, Addison, and Hockenson relevant. Is that the case his first week against the Colts? I'm not sure. You can run against the Colts. And if Aaron Jones has a field day, I question whether Hockenson in his first game is going to be fantasy worthy, even in the FFPC tight end premium format. If you have Hockenson in your league and you're an FFPC player, how should you be handling him his first week back off the knee injury?
Personally, if I had him, if I had a better option, I would wait and see how they're going to utilize him. If they're just going to throw him in and he's going to play, I want to see his pitch count. I want to see how many plays he's playing in the first week and how many looks he's getting. I don't want to put him in there and he get me a 0 because they're playing him, a quarter of the game and resting him because of his knee. They want to save him for the playoffs, obviously, because they're looking like they are going to go to the playoffs. So they probably want to rest him and put him on a pitch count. That's how I would assume, like they did with Nick Chubb when he came back.
Right.
Nick Chubb was kind of on a pitch count too. They gave him the touchdown just to give him a touchdown. I think they did that just to make the fans happy. But I wouldn't start him this week. I would wait and see. I know tight ends are slim. I'm in that position right now where I'm in trouble, but I would if you don't have a better option, I would sit him.
So refresh my memory. You have Mike Gesicki in your 14th place FFPC main event team. Who else do you have at tight end in that league?
I had Goddard. He went down. Then I had Noah. I picked up Noah Fant for a couple weeks.
Okay. All right.
He did me good the week before, and then last week he stunk, and now he's hurt.
Right.
So I picked up Gesicki because I didn't have another option. I was hoping to get him, and I picked him up. I got him. So and I knew T. Higgins wasn't going to play, so I just inserted him in just for that purpose.
So for somebody in a similar situation, right? Yeah. So for somebody in a similar situation as you, Brian, let's say instead of Goddard, you had Hockenson on this team, and you were facing Hockenson versus Gesicki this week. Who would you play?
I would probably still play. Hockenson does get more red zone looks, so I would still go Gesicki because of the consistency. I mean, he'll catch 7 passes for 60 yards, and tight end premium, that's all you need to get you into your double digits. That's the way I see it.
Right.
So,
And I'm with you on that for sure. Michael Kinzel with another question here. Is Jonathan Brooks ready to fire up week 9 or wait to see his usage and start him in week 10? I think I saw earlier this afternoon that Brooks is officially being listed as questionable, but he is not expected to play in week 9. So don't start him this week, Michael. Your thoughts, though, going forward, once he is activated and once he is deployed, Brian, how do you feel about Jonathan Brooks the remainder of the season in Carolina?
Oh, I think he's going to be outstanding. Probably next year, he'll probably be a high draft pick. This year, I mean, Chuba Hubbard's doing good. So I don't know. And they're going to ease Jonathan. They're going to ease him in slowly. And I have him in a couple leagues, and I've just been stashing him for weeks, waiting for that opportunity to see because he could be that guy that wins you your league. He comes back and just like Kyron Williams did last year. I picked him up off the waiver wire, and he did me great. So who knows what Jonathan's going to do for the Panthers eventually.
The great thing about Brooks, too, is once he steps into that offense, he should be the most talented playmaker on the field for Carolina. With Deontay Johnson now in Baltimore, it's not Thielen. I don't think Leggette's there yet. Obviously, you have Mingo and Jatavian.
Thielen's out, too, this week.
Thielen's not going to play this week. That's the thing. Even when Thielen is healthy, I still think Brooks is your game breaker. In that offense too. So we'll see what happens there. Let's talk about Deontay Johnson now in Baltimore. Jeff Zarebic, who covers the Ravens for The Athletic, Brian, says that John Harbaugh believes Deontay Johnson is ready to contribute. He is not on the injury report this week. And I think that knowing the type of player he is, we need to curtail expectations now that he is entering a lineup as a Super Bowl contenders lineup with Mark Andrews, Isaiah Likely, Zay Flowers, Derrick Henry. We have to curtail expectations a little bit this week. Your thoughts on, if you have Deontay Johnson this week, new team, are you still starting him this week as a first or second flex in the FFPC, or are you sitting him on the bench just to see what happens in his new role in Baltimore?
If your options are very limited, then you got to start him. But if you have a better option, I would sit him just to see how they're going to utilize him in the beginning. That's just the way I approach things. A new guy comes to the team, like DeAndre Hopkins goes to the Chiefs. He barely plays, right? He gets a catch or two, and then that's it. So if you starting him, don't expect a big game. You might get lucky enough to where he gets a big game, but I wouldn't expect it. I want to see how they're going to utilize him, how he knows the playbook. He might put him in for certain plays, and he might not even get a look.
Right.
So it's just wait and see. Don't push it unless you're desperate.
And I think Johnson is the type of player that he is not like the game changer that Amari Cooper was. He is not the game changer that Devontae Adams was. This is a guy who makes his living on gaining separation from the corner and gets 7 for 100 and a touchdown on a good week. He is not the type of guy that's ever going to go 12 catches for 170 yards and 3 touchdowns, right? That's just not his game. And when you have a limited upside like that, I think you are better off trying to find the higher ceiling guys on your roster and deploying him, at least until you find out how Deontay Johnson's going to work in this offense. He may just be the third option or maybe the fourth option, going forward. We don't know how it's going to go. And I think sitting him this week just to see what happens is probably the best way to do it. So I agree with you there, Brian.
Plus they're run heavy. They're a run
heavy team. Yep, exactly. So. That's a great point. Puka Nacua. I was doing the high stakes fantasy football show on the Better Sports Network last night, and we got the news on Puka Nacua hurting his knee in practice. He is listed as questionable in the late window against the Seattle Seahawks. Sarah Barshop, who covers the Rams for ESPN.com, had this story. I believe for ESPN.com, Sarah. I do apologize if you're not. It's The Athletic or whatever. Nacua aggravated that same knee that put him on IR earlier this season. Mike Garafolo from the NFL Network said that the injury wasn't serious. Sean McVay, the head coach for the Rams, said that there isn't anything structurally wrong with the knee, and he wouldn't, quote, bet against Nacua playing on Sunday. I would think he does play, but it's problematic, Brian, because this is a 405 or 425, whatever it is, start. This is a late game start. If you have Nacua on your team, are you deploying him in that late window? Or if you have a lesser option at 1:00, would you rather play that lesser option and be, protecting yourself against a potential Nacua inactive? This is a weird situation, and it sucks given how Nacua was great last week.
Yeah, it's kind of, you definitely got to make sure you got that backup at the 20, or I'm in Arizona, so the 205 or 405, the late window that you can substitute. I would put Nacua in my lineup in my flex until I got word, and then I would just throw another person in there. I'd definitely start Nacua, but I would definitely have a backup plan.
Okay.
And if anything, if you're in the FFPC, put in your waiver bid for whoever you can find. If you don't have anybody for Sunday morning, and see what you got, because there's my league has nobody available, but some of the leagues probably do. I don't know.
I'm trying to come up with different guys, and this is just a few of them that are in that late window or after the late window that you could deploy. Michael Wilson for the Cardinals, Gabe Davis, Parker Washington from the Jaguars. You could look at both of those guys. I don't know. I'd have to look up Jordan Whittington because I know he's been banged up the last couple of weeks.
Yeah, I think they said Gabe Davis is I don't know if he's going to play or not.
So that's another guy that you probably won't want to. Okay, that you don't want to count on him there. I mean, Khalif Raymond with the Lions, yuck. I don't like that. I don't know if you have Dontavian Wicks or Christian Watson, but that would be potential. I do like Josh Downs quite a bit Sunday night against the Vikings. Vikings have really struggled in against slot receivers this season. So that's a player you could look at.
Joe Flacco's the quarterback.
And Joe Flacco is throwing this. That's a great point as well. And if you wanted to wait until Monday night, you have Trey Palmer, Sterling Shepard, and Jalen McMillan for Tampa that you could pivot to on Monday night. That's a game where they are 9-point dogs on the road in Arrowhead. And maybe that's the pivot, right? If you have one of those 3 Buccaneers receivers on your team and Nacua can't go, you could pivot to them and just hope for a touchdown or hope for a big game, from like McMillan or something like that. That's a possibility as well.
If they're available.
If they're even available. Yeah. I mean, it's funny because, we saw a race to pick up those 3 Buccaneers receivers last week, but then I saw a few of them dropped on this week. So maybe they're not even available to pick up this week. That's another thing. So, but with apologies to all those late window Sunday night, Monday night receivers, that's about it. You may not have another option. And if you want to pivot to, I don't know, maybe you have Bucky Irving on your team. Maybe you have,
he might not play.
He
Bucky
might not.
Irving's out.
Yeah, that's another good point. Yeah, I don't know. Emmanuel Wilson for the Packers. I don't know if you want to trust him. Zach Charbonnet.
I would say Wilson for Arizona would be my top. He's actually on my bench in the FFPC right now. I just won't put him in there, but that's who I would pivot out of all those because he did score a touchdown last week. So he has that upside to where he might catch 2 balls for a touchdown. But if that's all you got, to go with, then I would try to pick him up if I could.
Yeah, I'm not seeing Kobe Parkinson for the Rams. I'm just looking at any kind of flexes at this point. And it's not great, Bob, as Pete Campbell would say from Mad Men. It's not great. So I think that you are playing a little bit fast and loose if you're planning on Puka Nacua this week. So if it works out for you, fine. If that's the type of fantasy player you are, then yeah, go ahead. But I'm just saying, prepare yourself for panic mode. That late window.
Unfortunately, that's what I had to do with Gesicki. Like I was like, okay, Noah Fant now all of a sudden popped up questionable. I'm like, oh no, I don't have anybody else. For some reason in the FFPC, I don't draft tight ends like I should, and I get other players, and then I get the lower end tight ends. So
it's tough when you're drafting in the main event or the Fantasy Pros Championship in that tight end premium format because you see all this value fall to you at running back and receiver, but then it's at the expense of tight end. So then you got to kind of cobble tight ends, and sometimes that works out, and maybe it'll work out too with Gesicki and Goddard, right? Maybe you can float and tread water with Gesicki until Goddard comes back, who's had a couple of really big time games this season. We'll see. And I'll definitely be rooting for you, Brian. And I want to thank you so much for coming on the show tonight, co-hosting with me. This was a lot of fun. Good luck.
This was cool.
Yeah, for sure. For sure it was cool.
If you ever need me to do it again, just let me know.
You're on the short list, Brian. You are on the short list for sure. I hope you are in contention and take down that $1 million grand prize come next month. And we will
open up the brewery and you can come out and visit.
Oh yeah, I'm definitely doing that. I will, once that brewery is open, when you win the $1 million, I will be your first customer. I will be there at the grand opening. That will be a lot of fun. Brian Covert 7 on the X is where to follow you for sure. Thank you so much for joining me tonight. Good luck the rest of the way, man. This was a lot of fun.
All right. Appreciate it, man. Thanks.
Thank you. That is Brian Covert, ladies and gentlemen, the 14th place team in the FFPC main event heading into week 9. So much fun. Hope you enjoyed it as much as I did tonight as we take you into the weekend for week 9 of the NFL season. I want to thank Brian. I want to thank the FFPC, Rob, Bryce, and of course, each and every one of you. We will be back next Friday with Ferrell Elliott, as well as former FFPC $500,000 champion Chuck Root. He will join us on the program. That's going to be a lot of fun. 10 o'clock Eastern time on Friday, November 8th. In case you missed this past week's RotoViz High Stakes Lowdown, we had Fantasy Pros Championship Week 8, 22nd place team owner Patrick Ryback on the show. He was a lot of fun. We got into a lot of stuff, not only with the waiver wire this week, but everything you need to know for Week 9. The High Stakes Lowdown will be back 10 o'clock p.m. Eastern time on Tuesday as well. Last night on the High Stakes Fantasy Football Show on the Better Sports Network, WheelRouteFF.com and Fantasy Pros contributor Kev Wheeler was my guest. I always love talking with Kev. He's one of the sharpest minds out there. It's so much fun to have him on last night for 2 hours heading into that Thursday night game. We'll be back with the HSFF show. Next Thursday, Rotoballer's Ryan Kirksey will join me for the full 2 hours heading into that Thursday night football game. It's the best. Like, I'm biased, I get it, but it is the best Thursday night fantasy football pregame show out there. 2 full hours heading into the game. It's a lot of fun. Play the FFPC Weekly Challenge right now. myffpc.com, myffpc.com. No draft, no salary cap. Choose the 10 or 12 players that you want and ride them all the way through the weekend's games. Remember, only 1 player per team, so no stacking in that format. Enter for as little as $35. Win up to $2,500 in 10, 30, and 100 team contests. You can play the classic or the slim format, myffpc.com. Remember to like this video, subscribe to the channel, comment on the video, share it with your friends, share it with your enemies, and get notified each and every time we go live, which will be the next time, Tuesday night at 10 p.m. Eastern time on the RotoViz High Stakes Lowdown. James Hicks was in here earlier tonight. Oinker says good night. And we will bid you adieu until next week. Your weekend officially starts now.
This has been another episode of the High Stakes Fantasy Football Hour presented by myffpc.com. It was broadcast live and was watched around the world. Balky and Ferrell will be back next week with more analysis, more interviews, and more advice from guests much smarter than they are. Thanks for watching, and we'll talk with you again next week.
I'll leave you with this tonight. I think I said that Ferrell was under the weather this week, so he will not be back until next week. I hope Ferrell gets better because this show is as good as it was tonight. And thank you for the kind words in the chat. It's so much better when Ferrell's on. I love doing it with Ferrell, even though Brian crushed it tonight, and it was a lot of fun. No, I always say this after the show. I don't do a good job enough promoting this. There are no international games this week. We have the German game. That's next week. So you don't have to worry about an early Sunday kickoff. However, 2 teams on bye this week. That's the Steelers and that's the Niners. Get those guys out of your lineup. You still have one chance to fix your rosters heading into week 9 with that 10 a.m. Eastern time waiver run on Sunday. There are a lot of issues for a lot. I have one team where I have Pearsall, Deebo Samuel, Christian McCaffrey, Jordan Mason, and Brock Purdy. So I have to make sure I get that lineup in order. Don't be left out in the cold with a bad lineup this week because you didn't plan for buys. So make sure you're fixing your teams on the waiver wire, compete all the way to the end. Make sure you are not angering the fantasy gods at myffpc.com and make sure you're submitting lineups and being competitive all the way to the end. You never know what can happen. Enjoy week 9, everybody. Thanks so much for watching the High Stakes Fantasy Football Hour. We will be back Tuesday night for the RotoViz High Stakes Lowdown at 10 p.m. Eastern time. Talk with you then.